Jeez. Oh my God. Hello, and welcome to
Distance learning.
welcome to week whatever this is. We're gonna jump in a little bit on some white balance stuff, which should be a review. Walk through that. Then we'll talk about ISO and noise. And then once we've gone through there, in our next clip, we'll talk about equivalent exposure, which is really the sort of, meat and potatoes kind of thing that we're going to be looking at this week. So let's take a look here at white balance. Marvelous white balance, the handout thing, which you should have seen. You should be familiar with, if I can point at them right down there, are various white balance little icons that you have on your camera. You probably have some others on there that are also interesting. Ones that we are the most interested in, of course, are your tungsten / incandescent, same thing. Your daylight, let me point at these guys. So there's daylight, there is incandescent / tungsten, and then to a lesser degree, cloudy and shade. Flash, we're not doing flash right now, so it doesn't matter. Fluorescent, no one knows what color fluorescent bulbs are in general anyway. Custom, come on, really? No. And auto, as a last resort. If you are somewhere in the light is like super wonky, you can throw it on auto just to get something that looks reasonable, but most of the time it's not going to be great. And you'll have a better time doing that afterwards in Lightroom or whatever, have better results. So we remember all this stuff, right? So looking at, right, here we are with our fluorescent lighting and an incandescent setting. That looks pretty good. Fluorescent lighting in an auto setting, 2 yellow green. Fluorescent lighting in a fluorescent setting, 2 red. That's why we don't use fluorescent, right? I mean, you can use fluorescent as a lighting source, but that's why the fluorescent white balance is not great. Fluorescent tubes come in a wide variety of actual colors, and there's no way for you to know by like just looking at them from afar which one they are. So generally don't do it, right? Try daylight, try tungsten. If neither of those work and it's super bad and annoying, try auto. Otherwise, just get as close as you can and leave it for post-production. The other thing to remember with white balance is that you can get a white balance, an overall white balance in your shot for one color of light. Goodness. But you cannot simultaneously balance 2 different colors of light, right? So if I have pink and blue light, right, nothing we can do about it. If I have here, this is a much more common scenario, I have sort of this yellowy, wormy light from these incandescent fixtures, and then down here at the bottom, I've got some window light, presumably coming in from over there somewhere. Same thing on this side, right? A window over there coming in from that direction, putting that blue light on my table. Nothing I can really do in post-production with any strong degree of accuracy to be able to fix that. It's just going to be what it is. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, ISO and noise. So that was white balance, really just as a review, because it's on the handout. Why not, right? It's free. Go for it. Take it. So ISO, we've been adjusting our ISO, I don't want to say willy-nilly, mostly because that's a silly thing to say, but we've been adjusting it a lot as we try to get a decent exposure, right? We've got 3 variables, shutter speed, right? What's the next one? Aperture, and the third one, ISO. So between those three, right, we started out setting our aperture, then we would adjust our shutter speed, maybe adjust our ISO, then we went and started adjusting our shutter speed, setting that first because we wanted to get blur or freeze motion. And then again, once we set it, we have to adjust the other two things to be able to get a good exposure, right? That's the way it works. You have a choice, right? You're like, okay, I want some particular aesthetic thing. Either I want the awesome frozen motion, I want the awesome shallow depth of field, I want the deep depth of field, I want the motion blur, whatever it is, you make a choice about one of those things and then you adjust the other two. With aperture and shutter speed, the sort of aesthetic effect that they have, right? So there's, obviously the big thing, which is if you make my aperture really big, more light comes in, my picture gets brighter. But, also when I open up my aperture and the hole gets really big, my depth of field gets shallower. Close it way down to like f22, my depth of field gets deeper, right? I have more stuff in focus at once. Both of those things, right, a shallow depth of field and a deep depth of field, are perfectly valid aesthetic choices. Same thing with shutter speed, right? If I freeze motion, that's cool, right? There are reasons I would want to do that. If I let motion blur out, right? Also cool. There are reasons why I would want to do that. I want to have like a waterfall with this like beautiful water streamy thing. Or in architectural photography, right? I want to see somebody walking by without necessarily fixating on what they look like, who they are they some lawyer type, what does that tell me about the building? No, I just want to be like, okay, people are about that big in this space, there they are, they're moving, looks occupied, that's great. So in both cases, it's Jesus. Man. In both cases, one of those is not wrong, right? Lots of depth of field, not wrong. Shallow depth of field, not wrong. Blur, not necessarily wrong. No motion blur, not necessarily wrong. With ISO, it's different, right? ISO, the higher my ISO gets, right, the more sensitive I am to the light that gets in, the more likely, Jesus, the more likely I am to be able to actually get a picture, right? I can actually see some of what the image is that's coming through. However, when I turn up my ISO, I do get a secondary effect. And the secondary effect that I get is something in your throat. It's really terrible. I shouldn't have filmed this at such a high ISO. The secondary effect that you get with a high ISO is that you get what's known as noise. So you get what's known as noise. Noise is just, you can imagine like if I have a microphone, right? I'm recording something. Cool, right? I'm a spy. Why not? Sure, I look like a spy. Yeah, well, hiding my secrets under my hair. And I go there, right? I'm at the dinner party and I see the guy over there talking to the, prime minister of whatever. And I've got my headphones surreptitiously on. I bring my microphone out and I can just barely hear him. And so I turn up the gain on the microphone. I turn up the volume on my headphones so that I can hear them a little bit more. And as it amplifies that, right, as it makes that sort of signal coming in louder, it doesn't just amplify the signal, the information that I want to get, it also amplifies the noise, all of the hiss and crackle and pop and static and like weird electronic garbage going on in the background of like, the cutlery and whatever. All of that gets amplified as well. So that's sort of the way that you should think about your ISO. As we boost that signal, right, as we turn up the ISO, as we boost our sensitivity to that light, we not only get the image that we want, we also get sort of the noise that comes along with it. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. Here, let me just turn off myself. There. Oops, sorry. I said, let me just turn off myself. Boop. Okay, so here we have a photograph of this sort of weird industrial thing near a bridge or tunnel or something like that. And I took a pretty high ISO shot of it. Now, you are probably going to have a better time looking at this on the actual PDF because it's a little hard here on the screen to be able to see what's going on. But I've got sort of three areas cut out. I've got this one up here, this lighter area in the middle, and then this dark area down at the bottom. And here they are. The lightest area right here has the least trouble with noise. That's because you're going to have less noise in a light area, right? Noise is going to be more apparent in darker areas, areas with a lot of tone. Light, for example, something's blown out, right? It's just white. There is no noise. Lighter areas are going to be less problematic. The midtones here, right? I can see some texture in there. It's not terrible. And down here in the dark area, right? Like in a solid black area, right? If you were to look at the handout, you can actually see a decent amount of texture there. But here, where everything is very patterny anyway, again, it's not going to be as apparent. All of these things are going to depend on your camera, right? So that's why we're going to do an exercise where you go out and shoot a bunch of ISOs, and you'll be able to see, like, okay, what does my camera look like? Right here we have, again, right, sort of a good exposure. And when you look at the good exposure and you brighten it up, right, I don't get all this noise in here, right? This is fine. That just looks brighter. With the really dark area, right, this is super underexposed. When I boost it up, the noise is much more apparent. So again, if you're making a big exposure adjustment, the noise will be more visible. If you're making a big exposure adjustment where you're bringing up things that are very dark, right, rather than just sort of lightning midtone things, again, noise is going to be more visible. Moral of the story is try to get your exposure right. Trying to shoot it too high of an ISO, trying to make a big exposure adjustment upward. So that's our overview of ISO. Now I'm going to go and show you some specific examples of how ISO looks on a particular camera, how that noise manifests itself in the next clip.